Attorney General, why take this step today on behalf of Washington State?
Well, we looked very closely at the president's executive orders, and this one immediately stood out as appropriate for challenge. As I said earlier today, birthright citizenship has been foundational for our constitutional principles. It is a well-established law and right upheld by our Supreme Court, and it would have immediate impact on thousands of Washingtonians, them directly, and also the state as a whole. The financial impact of denying citizenry means that Washington would no longer receive a substantial amount of federal funding. So we looked at a few different things. One, was it constitutional or not? This is plainly illegal, plainly contrary to our Constitution. Second, is it harmful to Washingtonians? And the answer was yes. And three, whether we were the right venue to bring such a suit. And there are multiple cases and challenges that are going to be brought to this lawsuit. But this one is incredibly serious. It is, in my view, un-American at its core, and we felt like we were the right place to bring one of the challenges.
Can you provide some context on why you need to file a separate case from the other 18 states and Massachusetts?
Yeah, we looked, and as our complaint specified, some of the direct harms to Washingtonians, and we worked really collaboratively with the other states, but we wanted to bring a case because we thought we had the right facts on the ground. And we've got a bench here in the Western District of Washington that is well versed in hearing these types of challenges. And we thought it was appropriate to have multiple lawsuits. So, again, our looking directly about impact on Washington seemed pretty clear to me that this was the right place to bring one of the challenges.
So you believe the court system, because of what happened in the first Trump term, is quicker to respond to these kind of challenges?
Well, they're certainly well versed in these types of challenges. There's new judges there, but we've had a bench that has worked really collaboratively. But most important for us was the harm to Washingtonians here in our state, and that's why we brought a case here.
So is there any other political strategy here? Because I did read something about Massachusetts, the other states filed in Massachusetts because of the appellate court issue.
Yeah, well, I'll let those states speak for themselves, but that case is a little bit unique. It's led by New Jersey, but filed in Massachusetts, which is in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Our case filed in the Western District is obviously in the Ninth Circuit, but I see no downside of multiple cases. And this is what happened the first time around. There were always multiple challenges in multiple states. It was fairly unheard of to have one single challenge been brought in one particular case. So what we did today was consistent with what many states have done over the years.
You made the point that you've been in office for 6 days, but were you preparing this filing before that?
Well, as I said, there's been a lot of work that's happened in this office over the last year, and then since being elected in November, I've met with this team that does the affirmative federal litigation work many times. So we've been meeting collaboratively and making decisions about the types of cases that we might bring. We were looking very closely. As I said, I truly was not hoping to bring a case in my 6th day in office. But when we saw the executive order and it matched with what most of our expectations were, we felt it was appropriate to bring. But a lot of work was done by Governor Ferguson and his prior role and the team here. But certainly over the last 2 and 3 months, we've worked really closely together on preparing for this.
Do you have other cases that you're ready to file based on Project 2025 and some of the claims?
Not today,
on the
no.
campaign?
No, and I don't know how many total executive orders were signed yesterday. I anticipate there will be more signed this week. It is not my hope to challenge every single thing. The president has broad scope and power. That is his right as elected president. But when it violates the law and harms Washingtonians, we will not shy from bringing a new case. But we have not planned or prepared for any particular case, but we're looking very, very closely at all the executive orders from yesterday, and we'll continue to treat it very seriously moving forward.
Because the governor has talked about it a lot, how many times he took on the Trump administration in the first term. Are you looking to file that many cases?
We'll file one case if we think that that's the only case that's warranted. We'll file 100 if we think that it is important for Washington to do that. But it is not my goal to be doing these press conferences every day. It is not my goal to be the resistance to the Trump administration, but it is my obligation to protect the law of Washington and to protect people. And that's why we bring these cases. And I think it's unfortunate that so much of our politics assumes bad intent or assumes grandstanding. And as I said, in this particular case, It is so obviously unconstitutional. It has been upheld by our Supreme Court. And to me, it's so obviously un-American. And I would hope that all of Washington could agree that when those things happen, we should challenge them and we should not be afraid to do that.
You heard a couple of questions come up during your press conference that there are Republicans who interpret the 14th Amendment slightly different, who accuse you already of just making a politically motivated filing here. How do you respond?
Well, there's two separate things, right? There is a very narrow fringe group of conservative legal scholars who have hung their hat on this phrase in the 14th Amendment. That is well outside of what the common understanding of the birthright citizenship law is, and so that is a legal theory that's being advanced. But to hear criticism, frankly, from Republicans in the legislature who are already putting out press releases accusing me of being political, it's really sad, frankly. It is a testament to how negative our politics is. That, I doubt that they've done the legal analysis that this office has done over the last year. I doubt that they've done the research that this team has done, and I doubt that they even read our complaint before they put out that press release. If they did, kudos to them. But I have a lot of skepticism, and it just really is unfortunate that the leader of the Republican Party in the state of Washington would immediately attack me on something like this and attack this office on something like this. We didn't get a phone call to have a conversation about it. He didn't ask any questions about why we brought such a case. But this is the polarization that we're facing. But I am not dissuaded by any of that. I am not dissuaded by polling or criticism. I am driven by what is right to defend Washington and what the law says, as I've done my entire career.
And you talked about the economic impacts. Your predecessor, the now Governor Bob Ferguson, has talked about a 6% across the board cut, although it could be lower in some departments, higher in other departments. Public safety is off the table. But he has specifically talked about cuts to the Attorney General's office. So in this entire conversation, when you're talking about filing things and the billable hours and all the hours that will be taken up with something like this, is this something that your office can really afford, this legal fight potentially with the Trump administration?
Oh, absolutely. We take the budget situation that we're facing very seriously. I do think it's important for people in Washington to know, and most people don't know, we are a revenue generating agency. I think we might be the only agency in state government that actually runs a profit because of the way it's been operated over the last 12 years, because of our aggressive litigation against people who are causing harm to Washingtonians. This agency is bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars to Washingtonians. And so much of our affirmative work has been funded by the really aggressive approach on behalf of Washingtons. We are facing a budget crisis here. We, as an agency, me as the Attorney General, need to take that very seriously. But the types of cuts that Governor Ferguson has talked about, which I've expressed my opposition to, that would have a real impact on our ability to bring consumer protection cases, the cases that directly impact most Washingtonians. That would have a direct impact on our ability to do environmental protection work or civil rights work. And so the legislature and the governor are going to be faced with a choice, like, do we make cuts to these programs and to this work that protects people, or do we find other ways to fund it? And that's a decision ultimately for the legislature and the governor. As one of the state agencies, it's my obligation to do everything I can to work collaboratively with them, but also make sure that they understand the impacts.
When do you expect a judge to take this up?
Well, we anticipate getting a judge assigned to the case today. As I mentioned in the press conference today, we'll file a motion for an immediate injunction on this action. How quickly the judge hears that is ultimately going to be up to them. But I would expect in the coming weeks that that'll be in court and being heard, as well as the other cases across the country.
My last question for you is that there's a lot of scuttlebutt. There was a lot of scuttlebutt online and social media groups that ICE is going around already in Seattle and positioning themselves to potentially be part of an immigration-related raid. Has your office heard anything about that at this point?
We certainly were aware of that fear even well before the Trump administration came into effect. So I think that fear is well grounded. But I've haven't personally heard some of the stories in the last few days. I'm sure that people have been reaching out to our office, and so I'll talk to the team about what is on the ground. And there are some actions that the president and his team can take that will be legal. It might be actions that I don't like, but there may be actions that are legal. And so we will look closely to see if their actions is consistent with federal law and Washington state law, but there might be some enforcement actions that are taken that is within their purview. The federal government is the federal immigration authority in this state, but we need to make sure that they abide by the law and that people aren't harmed or their rights violated, whether they're citizens or non-citizens.
And you made the point that you don't agree with the pardoning of the January 6th.
No, look, well, first of all, we have a president who is a convicted felon. America chose to ignore that and elect him, and so he is the duly elected president of the United States. But the fact that one of his very first actions would be to pardon people who assaulted law enforcement. You know, we talk about the political divide and criticism from Republicans in this state. We have dozens, if not hundreds of people who violated the law, thousands who violated the law total, but hundreds who are involved in assaulting law enforcement officers. And the new president pardoned them. You know, you had people that were sentenced to upwards of 18 years in prison who are now pardoned. I know how much work went into building those cases. I know, and I've read the stories of those victims, both members of the public and law enforcement who were harmed by the attacks on January 6th. And the fact that the new president chose as one of his very first actions to pardon all those people, I don't know how anybody of any political party could think that was okay. In fact, the vice president of the United States, just a couple months ago, said that they would not pardon people who harm law enforcement. And now it's kind of crickets from him and other people who are just letting President Trump act without any oversight. And you know, here in Washington, we had, I think, 30 plus people who were also convicted of violating the law, and now they're pardoned. You know, the pardon power is the president's to use. It is not going to be subject to a challenge from this office, absent something that I'm not considering. But I do find it offensive. And as someone who has worked in law enforcement for much of my career as a federal prosecutor, as an Army JAG officer, prosecutor, I find it offensive that that sweeping pardon was executed and that those people aren't going to be held accountable. And again, that should cross political beliefs and political positions. So it is offensive to me as a Department of Justice alum and as a law enforcement professional.
Thank you.
Thank you.